Of all the hardware out there, I hear the most misinformation about the MSX standards. I've often heard them referred to as a lone desktop or home console, instead of them being a set of open hardware standards for any PC to follow, to apply for an MSX seal, signaling that PC is compatible with any other PC's peripherals and software that have been awarded that same MSX seal. By the 90s, there were 4 MSX standards, but English speakers often refer to them as the MSX, as if they're a lone machine. And what does MSX stand for? Nothing. According to Microsoft's president in 1983 being asked if the MS is presumably Microsoft, what does the X stand for? To which he responded chuckling it doesn't actually have a meaning. But a logo needs to look and sound good, right? Which explains why even in the official What's MSX introduction, the backronym is never defined despite being reported to mean different things. With Microsoft's Far East president credited with coming up with the idea for MSX, saying the name is just a result of the VHS standard, making them want a 3-letter name. He is presented as the Forrest Gump of a version of desktop history riddled with common misconception. And why does the history of the MSX standard seem so disproportionately riddled with speculation? I commonly see English sources say the MSX standards made up most of the home desktop market in Japan during the 1980s, but nobody seems to know how much they sold, sometimes estimated to have numbers beneath NEC's PC series alone. I've seen the MSX standards being presented as predating both the commercial microcomputer desktop and home console industries, when both would have been in at least their 3rd generations by the time the original MSX standards launched in 1983, which might have actually helped that initial standards launch. If you were a company wanting to enter the crowded and competitive home desktop market, years after the leading brands had established their ecosystems, then getting an MSX seal signaled your new machine was already part of a growing ecosystem of existing and upcoming products. So what horror games were on the horizon for this initial Microsoft X standard? 1986's Yokai Mansion is about said mansion on the outskirts of town that gained a reputation for the urban legend of its name, drawing in a girl named Rika. But she hasn't returned. You are Koji, a boy armed with a flashlight going in and facing the dangers to find her, fighting your way through the cemetery to enter the dark mansion that well uses decorative pieces like cabinets and torn screens. You'll find the game is packed with strange and dangerous apparitions. You could run into some horrifying things while exploring the mansion and its immediate surroundings for key items to get further. And the more batteries you have, the more powerful your flashlight is. But getting hit decreases your batteries. And if you run out, the thought of you being in the pitch black with the creatures around you is a creepy end to meet. You can find food around, but eating it doesn't heal you. You need to offer its statues for that. On October 23rd of the following year, IREM would then give us quite the remake for the family computer. The original game had you explore a normal-sized residence before realizing how far underground it was expanded, and you spent a lot of time in these lived-in cave areas. In the IREM remake, the mansion is massive, being split into 5 self-contained zones, but thankfully still scroll room to room like Zelda so you can map them out. Doing this will also reveal that each zone is shaped like a kanji, with different things to worry about like different apparitions from the original. It's pretty nice playing them back to back with the remake coming off to me as more challenging and complex, as if it's a sequel challenge from the first game. I'm glad to see these 2 games still get their well-deserved fanfare, which I attribute to how accessible and fast-paced the combat is. On the slower-paced side that still has action, however, you have the House game in 1987. The game is about a horror author looking for his son after moving into his late aunt's mansion, but finds himself haunted by his late brother-in-arms, who is mad that he didn't give him the easy way out in Vietnam, leaving him to be captured by the enemy and slowly go out in pain. Though primarily taking place in the infested residence, you'll also play through run-and-gun Vietnam flashbacks to break up the gameplay, but contrast a little harsh in pacing to me. I enjoy the enemies in this game, and they can sometimes give you a twist like the scissor assailant following you into a Vietnam nightmare. Of course, most of the game is exploring the mansion and perhaps using your wits to overcome its dangers. Now, the idea of standardizing hardware sounds like a good way to make things simple for everyone. And then they released the MSX2 standard. So joke's on you thinking your MSX1 would be the standard. That lasted 2 years. Now you can't play this new Metal Gear series is for the MSX2 standard. Then, to scare you out of keeping up with the Joneses, was the MSX2 Plus standard about 2 or 3 years after that. And I'm not sure either were good moves. Their spaced out launches and naming conventions could come off less like offering a 3-tier product line and more like frequently moving on from focusing on a customer's expensive investment. But that's my 2 cents. When it comes to this new standard, 1987's War of the Dead scale and art overwhelmed me in a good way. One day, all communication and transportation with the town of Chinese Hill ceased. Those attempting to travel there never return. A military company was sent in, and within hours, the government lost contact with them. What was happening? It was beyond understanding. So they sent in the newly established Supernatural and Special Weapons Attack Team, SWAT. You play as a member of this elite supernatural warrior group with latent powers to further awaken, that essentially just buff you as you explore the town that you're a native of. It's interesting seeing the state of this town mid-apocalypse instead of post-apocalypse, facing things from some good monster designs to the military. Combat goes into a side-scrolling view and you have quite a variety of items and arsenal to work with, despite the game's design emphasizing that you should pick your battles, especially with your limited inventory. You'll see a lot of people primarily doing knife runs of War of the Dead, but it's not as impressive as it initially sounds. A thorn in this game's side is that it's far too easy to escape combat, which looms over the entire experience. This is yet another game that gets called the first survival horror game in. I wouldn't even call it an early survival horror game at this point. Nothing in 1987's War of the Dead is anything we haven't seen before in earlier horror games. But I love having a place to sleep to advance the day and night cycle, and that feeling of dread that you'll run into something while exploring. Mixed with the slower pacing, it can give you satisfying agency to have you tactically think of how to approach day versus night. So, War of the Dead 2. This sequel ditches the limited ammo, varied arsenal, day and night cycle, and side-scrolling combat, in favor of top-down shooting that does fix the issue of it being too easy to avoid combat in my opinion. But overall feels like a downgrade and not just options. But satisfaction is now you don't worry about supplies at all. It kills the game for me, which is a shame because I'm highly interested in the second game setting, but not with such shallow gameplay. The year after, there was also a remake of the first game for Nippon Electric's home console and 88 desktop, and the PC Engine version of this game seems to be more updated from the PC 88 version. I don't think it's as stripped as the second game, but removing the sleep system, the dynamic time of day, and the zombie grunt enemy in a game subtitled War of the Dead, it ultimately makes the game less interesting to explore. You do, however, start in the center of a usually much larger playing field in combat now, which makes you have to actually juke aggroed enemies to get away. This I like. There's also experience points for upgrades serving as an incentive to not run away. And I feel there's a much lower frequency of overworld encounters, making it feel a bit less intrusive. That being said, while the graphics are more complex, I'm not a fan of the art direction. From the replacement of those zombie enemies to the urban downtown area being made into a roadless suburb. I can't deny the fluidity of gameplay though. Mixed with this degree of color variety, it's an example of what people were doing with the 16-bit PCs of the fourth console generation that predated the current MSX standard. In the desktop space, the 16-bit PC-98, which even predated the original MSX standard, had risen through the 1980s to become what many considered to be the default desktop of the country. So across one generation of family computer, a fourth MSX standard would launch. This time for the increasingly popular 16-bit computers. But by 1990, it seemed only Panasonic was still keeping up with these, and would then stop. Still, I wouldn't entirely write off this new MSX standard's presence through them. I'd even shout out the use of horror in the world building of Illusion City. In the future, Hong Kong is a Midgar-esque city suspended above the ruins of original Hong Kong, where you and your fellow monster hunter live. But recently, a strange infestation has been crawling out of the rubble on a scale concerning the world. Time to get to work in a game with some gnarly designs to confront in turn-based combat, though it can feel like most of the game is spent exploring around the city. The monsters drink human blood, the most common of which seem to travel in packs and cut off your limbs, though they're not the only ones who attack people in this way. There's things out there that mock human language to bait people out at night. Illusion City came out for other systems, including the Sega CD version getting a new opening, and apparently a few new music tracks taking advantage of that CD quality audio. You can technically still license the MSX seals, with the brand embracing its retro desktop audience from 2001 onward. While some might have an over-ambitious idea of the MSX standard's dominance in the 1980s, others view them as ultimately failing for not standardizing desktop hardware. Where I stand is that I respect and appreciate the standards for ultimately being successful enough to birth years of hardware and software, beloved to this day. I'm Oktar.